Well, it's good to have you guys here. This service, like Scott said, just going to be a little different. We did something like it before. We're going to keep continuing on the Who is Jesus series, and this is just kind of a personal study of mine, just thinking about Jesus and who he was as a person on earth, So, some of it's just very contemplative, just thinking about who he was, what he might have been like. What I'm hoping is that it will be a time for you to just be able to, meditate on Jesus yourself. That's why I encourage you to read your journals. We're going to turn the lights down. We're going to have worship in between these little short sermonettes. Because I just want to give you guys some space to think about, to think about why I keep calling, to think about. So, we're going to talk about three things today: the simplicity, patience, compassion of Jesus, just different things I've been thinking about. First thing, one thing that's really interesting to me about Jesus is that, as I was thinking about him, one thing that's really interesting to me is how long it was before he revealed himself to the world. 30 years is a long time. I'm 30 years old right now. So you just got to wonder, okay, Jesus is the Son of God. What was he doing all that time between when we hear about him when he's 12 years old in the temple and when he begins his ministry at the beginning of Mark, when he's 30 years old, going out and preaching? Did he work a job? A regular job? Probably, He probably had to show up for work every day. Did he go out and help the poor in his community? Was he involved in any, community activities, Who was he? What would he have been like? And how did he go unnoticed for so long? Last time I talked about Jesus, I was talking about his humility and how striking that is. And as I was thinking about it, I think a thing that must have flowed out of his humility so easily was his simplicity. And what I mean by that is that Jesus really sought to be a good person. That was a desire of his life. And what I mean by that, when he sought to be a good person, is that he wanted to walk in close relationship with his Father and be obedient to him. That was what he wanted. He wasn't looking for people to recognize him. He wasn't trying to make a name for himself. He wasn't trying to start a ministry and change the world. He was just trying to walk with his Father, so to speak. I believe he knew why he was there, but he wanted to live a good life, and he trusted his Father. So he knew when the time was right for him to go out and start his public ministry, his Father would show him. So he was content to just be behind the scenes, a nobody, for almost 30 years. If his Father wanted him to live a normal life for 30 years unnoticed and serving behind the scenes, he was okay with that. He wasn't trying to be noticed by people. And that's cool, because I feel like all of us kind of deal with a mixture of that. Pretty much all of us in here have a desire. We want to know God and we want to obey him. We want to have that relationship with him. But we also wrestle with this desire to be noticed by people. We don't just want to know God, we also want people to think that we know God. We want people to respect us as a good Christian person. And this kind of, it kind of shows up in little ways, part of the reason sometimes we're not very honest about what we're struggling with when we come to a church environment like this or whatever, sometimes, because we don't want people to think badly of us, But you can't just walk up in here and admit that you've been struggling with something really difficult, because people might be like, oh, that's weird. Or you feel like that's how it would be perceived. So you just kind of keep it to yourself. You don't, maybe if you're in Bible study, sometimes people won't speak up and share because they're afraid of what others will think of them. Maybe they'll give a bad answer. Maybe they won't think I'm very knowledgeable of the Bible. So we kind of wrestle with this mixture of we want to know God, we want to walk with him, that's true, but we also want people to admire us and respect us. And we wrestle with that. But Jesus didn't, and that would have been so cool. We wear masks, but Jesus didn't. All he wanted, all he wanted was to be really good. He wanted to walk with his Father. He really wanted to be obedient to his Father. He wasn't trying to impress anybody. And he wanted to walk with his Father, whether that brought him approval or disapproval from others. Like you see that in his life. So think about this. When he's 12 years old, he's in the temple, and they are amazed. He's talking to the teachers, and it says everyone who heard him, this 12-year-old boy, back then he would have just been becoming a man. This 12-year-old boy becoming a man is so knowledgeable. The questions he's asking, everyone is amazed. How does this little boy have so much in-depth questions to the Bible? Everyone's admiring him. Wow. But they didn't like it so much when he was 30 years old and he starts questioning the Pharisees and the Sadducees about why they do things the way they do, right? But he was still going to ask the questions because he was looking for truth and he wanted others to see the truth as well, right? He wanted to be good. It didn't matter if people approved of it or not. It's interesting when you read him, there was a time when Jesus perceived that they were going to come and make him king by force. So he slips away, right? But then there's other times where the crowd starts getting ready to stone him because of the things he's saying. There were times when the crowd loved him, and there were times when the crowd hated him. There's a time when the crowd cries, Hosanna, blessed is he who comes in the name of the Lord. And then a time when the crowd cries, crucify him. We will not have this man to be our king. And so, no matter what it brought him from a social perspective, it didn't matter. Jesus wanted to do what was right, to know God and walk with him. That's what mattered. And it's cool because in the Sermon on the Mount, Jesus talks about this. He says, when you pray, don't be like the hypocrites, because they stand on the street corner and they pray long prayers so that they can be seen by others. And when you fast, don't disfigure your face, but wash your face so that others don't know you're fasting, and only God knows. When you give, don't let your left hand know what your right hand is doing. Don't do these things to be seen by men. Do it for God and him alone. And Jesus was that kind of person who did that. And what's so cool about that is if we could embrace that life where we're not doing things to be seen, we're willing to be vulnerable even if others have a lesser opinion of us, even if they're surprised at what they hear we struggle with, when we're willing to live that way, when we want to walk with God, no matter what it takes, we're free. Because when you're not chained by people's opinions anymore, then you're free to really live life abundantly. See, like Jesus, he was able to go eat with Pharisees and go eat with the tax collectors and the prostitutes. In the Bible, he sits down with Pharisees and eats with them, and he sits with prostitutes and tax collectors. He wasn't trying to please either crowd. He was just being there to love people. It didn't matter who they were. And the Pharisees were like, why do you eat with them? Jesus is like, this is why I'm here. He was free to touch someone who had leprosy. He was free to spit on the ground and make mud and heal somebody that way. I mean, even though, there's no rules for how to heal people, that seems like a really weird way to heal somebody, to make mud and put it on their eyes. But it didn't matter. That's what God wanted him to do. He was going to do it. He was free to welcome children and pray for them in a society where everybody kind of belittled children and, pushed them to the fringes. Jesus welcomed them. He didn't care what people thought about that. He was able to throw off the culture ideas of what he should do and just trust and obey his Father. What a great life, right? What a free life. He wasn't shackled with the worry of trying to make himself acceptable. He just wanted to please his Father. So, we don't know a whole lot about what Jesus did before he began his ministry, but one thing we can know is that he was good and he was free. I feel like if you met him, he's the kind of person who just had such a vigor, such a life. He wasn't worried about trying to please anybody. He just wanted to be good. He's the kind of person that would go do something that was right, no matter what anybody thought. I want to ask you guys something. I want to encourage you to meditate on this as we go into our first worship time. Are you free? Do you feel shackled by the opinions of others? Is there something in you where you want to please God, but you're also trying to present yourself in such a way that others will admire you? Is your only desire to please God and obey him? I think for most of us the answer is probably not, right? But I think we can come to God and say, God, I don't want to live so that I'm trying to make everybody else happy with me. I want to live for you. I want to do what you say, no matter what. I want to be like Jesus. I want to encourage you to meditate on that as we worship Jesus for a little bit.
Gave your life for us, and we are amazed, and we stand in awe, for we have been changed by the power of the cross. How great, how great, how great is your love. How great, how great, how great is your love. How great, how great, how great is your love for us. In your kindness you lead me home. In your presence where I belong, you called me out, lifted me up. How great is your love. From the heights of heaven you stepped down to earth. Innocent perfection, gave your life for us. We are amazed, and we stand in awe, for we have been changed by the power of the cross. How great, how great, how great is your love. How great, how great, how great is your love. How great, how great, how great is your love for us. There has never been, there will never be a God like you, a love so true. There has never been, and there will never be a God like you, a love so true. There has never been, and there will never be a God like you, a love so true. There has never been, no, there will never be
Another thing that amazes me about Jesus is his patience. It makes sense that he would be patient since he was so humble and just wanted to walk with his Father and be good, wasn't trying to make a name for himself. But still, it's amazing the self-control it would have taken for him to wait for those 30 years. I mean, have any of you ever had a situation that really was on your heart or bothered you and you wanted to fix it, and you felt like you had the solution, but you didn't know if it was the right time? Have you ever felt that pressure of like trying to control, and wait for the right time and not just jump out and fix it or jump out and say something? You know what I mean? Sometimes, like I said already, we try to fix problems too quickly because we're impatient. Has anybody ever had a problem and you just tried to fix it because you were impatient and it didn't work out well? I think we can all relate to that somehow, And often that impatience is rooted in anxiety, right? Because we're afraid that if we don't get out there and fix it, something's going to happen, or we're anxious about this situation, and so we need to fix it right now. And so we just do what we think is best, and that's not always the way to go. And there's a balance, right? Because you can go too far the other. I'm sorry I'm coughing, y'all. I got this cough hanging on that's been here for weeks. But anyways, sometimes you go too far the other way where you don't ever do anything because you're anxious. It's like you got this problem and you just try to avoid. You just try to act like it's not there, and not dealing with your problems ever is just as bad as dealing with them too quickly. So there's a balance. But yeah, the opposite can be true. Sometimes we try to go out and fix it, and it can be a legitimate problem, but sometimes we need more patience. We need to wait. We need to not go so quickly. And Jesus was a perfect example of that. He said, I can do nothing of my own. As I hear, I judge. I don't seek my own will, but the will of him who sent me. It's in John 5:50. In John 12:49, he says, I haven't spoken on my own authority, but the Father who sent me has given me a commandment what to say and what to speak. And I wonder if we can learn something from that. If we can learn that if God was able to direct Jesus in the different problems and situations he faced, that we should learn to wait on God to speak to us and lead us as well. Again, like I said, there's a balance. Sometimes people can wait for that golden sign from heaven, and, it takes wisdom and it takes discernment. Getting counsel is always helpful, but I think there is a place to ask yourself, am I acting out of anxiety? Am I trying to fix this right now because I'm afraid it's all going to fall apart if I don't? Are we able to rest in Jesus and wait for God to give us the wisdom we need? It's hard. Another thing about Jesus' patience that just strikes me is his patience with people. Like the 12 disciples is a great example. You've got somebody who was a tax collector, Matthew. The people did not like tax collectors. And you've got fishermen who would have maybe been taxed by people like Matthew. You've got all these different people coming together. Simon the Zealot, James and John, the sons of thunder. You know what they're called? What an interesting group. I mean, it must have been crazy sometimes, It must have been a really wild bunch. They had different ideals. There was competition among that he kept loving both of them. It says in John 6:64, Jesus knew from the very beginning who was going to betray him. He knew what was in Judas's heart, but he still invited him into his inner circle. And I think, and lots of people argue about this, but I don't think Judas had to betray Jesus. I think Judas had a choice. And Jesus kept loving him with the hope that Judas would change. He loved Peter Peter's an opinionated and passionate person, but he's also weak and scared. You know? When a servant girl asks him, "Are you one of his disciples?" "I don't know what the F you're talking about." You know? Starts swearing and cursing. "I don't know that man." And Judas would betray Jesus and Peter would deny him, but Jesus never gave up on either of them. The patience of Jesus. He walked with them. He loved them. He washed their feet. That's the thing that gets me, you know? To know that Satan has already entered into the heart of Judas to betray you, and you wash his feet. It's amazing and powerful. He kept giving them opportunities to really have their hearts transformed. And I think, and a lot of us in here have seen, that God's patience is able to break through the hardest hearts, you know? I think about this in nature. Like, have you ever seen a tree that's growing up by a house and the roots start to crack the foundation of that house, literally split that house in two, you know? And if you don't get that stump out of there and those roots keep growing, that house is eventually going to break. It's like a waterfall, you know? Water, you drop it on the floor, it doesn't do anything, but you let water keep running on a rock face for years and years and years, and it'll cut a channel through the rock. It'll make places there that weren't there before. And that is the way God's patience is, I feel like, is that it might not seem like God is working in someone's life. It might not seem like anything is happening, but his patience has a way of breaking through even the hardest hearts. And that's the way he is with us. You know, this doesn't stop after you become a Christian. It's not like God's patient with you until you become saved, and then he's like, you know, get to it. He's patient with us. All of us have areas where we still need to grow, and we know it. And God has been so patient with us. He hasn't given up on us. He hasn't abandoned us. He's still loving us. Even right here, right now, he's telling you that even though you know those areas that I'm talking about, I'm patient with you. I want you to know that I'm patient with you. And the choice is ours whether we will respond to God's patience. Paul asks the Jews in the book of Romans, he says, "Do you presume on the riches of his kindness and his forbearance and patience? Don't you know that God's kindness is meant to lead you to repentance?" And the choice is ours. Like, God is patient, but the choice is ours whether we're going to receive it and allow him to change us or not. So Judas, like, Jesus showed his patience and kindness to Judas and Peter, but Judas ended up rejecting it, and Peter received it. That was really the main difference between both of them. God showed his patience in the days of Noah. Noah was building his ark for 120 years, if I'm not mistaken. A long time. But nobody listened. And the Bible is full of prophets who preached, right? Like Jeremiah, who preached and said, hey, this is what God is saying. And they wouldn't listen to him. And God was patient and patient until eventually their own choices caught up to them and they received their own consequences. And I just want to encourage y'all today to think about two things as we go into our next song. Think about God's patience for you. And I just want you to recognize that God is so patient. He's not going to give up on you. But also recognize that his patience is meant to lead you to repentance. Don't presume on that and just, hope that the choices you're holding on to will never catch up to you. Recognize that God is patient with you because he wants to bring you into something better. May we be those who allow God's kindness to lead us to repentance. So I encourage you to meditate on that as we sing another song.
the song that's always been in me. All glory and honor, dominion and power to you. A million angels fall face down on the floor, all to echo, holy is the Lord. My heart can't help but sing, with all of heaven roar, forever echo, holy is the Lord. Oh, forever echo, holy is the Lord. Memorized by every heart, written in eternity, every lifted voice apart, joining in the symphony. All glory and honor, dominion and power to you. All wisdom and wonder belong to no other but you. A million angels fall face down on the floor, all to echo, holy is the Lord. My heart can't help but sing, with all of heaven's roar, forever echo, holy is the Lord. Oh, forever echo, holy is the Lord. Standing at the end of time, there before the throne of grace, majesty before my eyes, let it take my breath away. A million angels fall face down on the floor, all to echo, holy is the Lord. My heart can't help but sing, with all of heaven's roar, forever echo, holy is the Lord. Oh, forever echo, holy is the Lord. Oh, forever echo, holy is the Lord.
I heard a really interesting talk the other day. Two people were talking about being compassionate, and one of them began to talk about how compassion is really a complicated virtue, because we often think of compassion as being kind, being nice to people, trying to meet people where they're at and just support them and all of that. But real compassion, I mean, it's true to some extent, supporting people, being kind to them, that's part of compassion. But real compassion at its core is wanting to do what's best for somebody that you're interacting with, What do they really need? How can I help them? And that looks different in different situations. So he gave this example. He said, like, when you have a baby, a little baby that's just born, whenever that baby cries, you're going to meet that baby and you are going to give it whatever it needs to help it feel comfortable. If it needs comfort, if it needs food, if it needs sleep, if it needs snuggles, doesn't matter what it is, you're not going to leave that baby unattended. You're not going to let it make decisions that could hurt itself. But it's a baby, you know? You are there to protect it. But as the baby begins to get older, compassion is still there, but it begins to look a little bit different. Compassion begins to become helping this child grow up to become an adult that is capable and can take care of themselves. If your child is a teenager and every time your teenager complains, you're right there trying to fix whatever problem they have, you're probably not doing very well. And your teenager is probably not becoming very well prepared to be an adult in the world, right? A parent at some point may allow their child to make decisions that have negative consequences, and the parent doesn't save them because that will help the child learn, you know? Compassion at some point even introduces an element of judgment where you love this person, but you're not going to save them from the consequences of their mistake because you know that's what they really need if they're going to grow. That's challenging, you know? And I was thinking about that and how God is compassionate with us. You know, whenever we have a problem, we often just want God to come in and fix it, you know? God, fix my problem. Make it all go away. Make me just superhuman and walk through it like it's no big deal. But God, like a good father, he wants to help us become mature. He wants to help us come to a place where we can walk in faith and in peace, where we can trust him no matter what. You know, Paul said in Philippians, he said, I have learned in whatever situation I am in to be content. And how many of us would like to be able to say, yeah, no matter what I'm facing, I have learned how to be content? Wouldn't that be nice? We would all like to say that, right? But how many of us would like to go through what Paul had to go through in order to learn that contentment? See, we want to have perfect peace in every situation, for example, but we don't want to be in situations that seem unstable in order to learn how to have perfect peace in every situation. And I want to be careful. I'm going to give a disclaimer here. Well, I'm going to give a qualifier here, but sometimes God allows us to be in situations that to us seem unstable so that we can learn that he is strong enough and we can learn to rest in him through it. Now, I want to be careful because I don't want to say that God causes all kinds of bad things to happen to us. You know, I think of it more like this, like Ariella is learning how to ride her bike, you know? There are times when she falls off where I don't rush over and help her get back up, right? Because I want her to learn that she is able to take a hit and get up and keep going. She's got a strong body. She's going to be okay, right? All of us have done that when we were letting our kids learn how to ride bikes. And she does a great job. She's tough. She falls down all the time now and gets back up like it's no big deal. And I think God wants us to know that sometimes, look, things can look unstable. Things can look bad. Trouble can come into your life, and it's going to be okay. I'm going to get you through it. And we can't learn that until we live through it. Now, the reason I want to be careful is there's a lot of nuance to this conversation because thoughts can come up like, well, did God cause this bad thing to happen? Did God cause this bad thing to happen? You know, especially like major bad things. And I just want to say it like this. It's hard to understand how God's sovereignty and free will and choice and all of that plays together in our world. But one thing we can know for sure is that God is not the author of evil. If something is evil, if something evil happened to you, God was not a part of that in any way. He didn't plan for that to happen. He didn't want that to happen to you. You know, Ariella, I may allow Ariella to fall off a bike and even want that to some extent in her life to help her grow. There's no way I want Ariella to experience a car crash that seriously injures her, right? Now, if she goes through a car crash that seriously injures her because we live in a broken world, I'm going to be there for her. And I believe she can still overcome and live a great life. But I would never want that to happen. And that's the way I believe it is with God. God doesn't want evil. He's not the author of evil. He doesn't tempt anyone with evil. So if something evil happened to you, God wasn't a part of it. And he hates that it happened to you. That's why he sent Jesus, because he's trying to fix this whole mess. But he will be with you through it all. And he is going to work it for good in your life. And I think we can hold on to that truth. So it's interesting to think about compassion, wanting to do what's best for us, wanting to do what's best for others. It's interesting to think about that in Jesus' life and the way he ministered to people, because he didn't always act the same way towards everyone. You know, he didn't have any grudges, vendettas, bitterness. He wasn't favoring anyone better than anyone else, but still he didn't act the same towards everybody. So, for example, the woman caught in adultery, supposedly, they drag her in front of Jesus. They say, we should stone her. Jesus does not immediately call her out for the bad thing she's done, right? He knows what she needs is someone to defend her right now. So he stoops down and starts writing in the sand, and whatever he wrote convicted those who wanted to condemn her, and they left. And then he says to her, where'd everybody go? Did nobody condemn you? Well, I don't either. Go and sin no more. So what she needed was a defender in that situation, not somebody who was just going to jump on her about her sin. But then when the rich young ruler came, who thought he had it all together, and he said, I've obeyed all the commandments since I was a boy. It says Jesus looked at him and loved him and said, you still lack one thing. Go sell everything you have, give it to the poor, and then come and follow me. Because that man needed to see that he didn't have it all together, that he needed help. Jesus' compassion looked different in those situations based on the circumstances. Peter, at some point, he's telling Peter, hey, Satan demanded to have you so he could sift you like wheat, but I'm praying for you. And he calls Peter a rock. And then later, when Peter is telling Jesus he shouldn't die on the cross, he says, get behind me, Satan. You're an offense unto me. Because in those two situations, two different approaches were needed in order to help Peter get to the truth. When the woman's son died, he goes right up to her and fixes that problem, raises that son from the dead. But then there's the man at the pool of Bethesda, and he asks him such an interesting question. The man is laying by the pool. You can preach a whole sermon on this. And the pool, he's laying there because the hope is that when the angel stirs the water, whatever, he can get in there first and get healed. And Jesus walks up to him and says, do you want to get better? Do you want to get well? I think that's such an interesting question, because isn't it true that we can get so used to our hang-ups and our addictions and our problems that we really need somebody to ask us, do we actually even want to get better? Do we actually really want to get rid of this in our life? Like we say we do, we're lying by the pool acting like we want to get better, but do we really? We talk about, yeah, man, I want this out of my life, but do we really want it out of our lives? What an interesting question. Jesus knew. His compassion looked different. When Peter's walking on the water, Jesus calls him out to walk on the water. What an amazing experience. And then when he sinks, it says in Mark that immediately, I love how you put that word in there, immediately, Jesus reached down and grabbed him and pulls him back up. And then he asks him, why did you doubt? And I just love the way Jesus' compassion worked there. He helped him first, and then he challenged him on his faith. He wasn't down there drowning in the water, and Jesus was like, what's the matter with you? Why are you doubting me? Splashing water in his face. Jesus didn't do that. And so I think we can learn something from Jesus, that compassion doesn't always look the same in action for everyone, but it always does what's best for the other person. And I think that's a great thing for us to remember. You meet somebody who's living a lifestyle that is sinful, that's wrong. Of course, we need to be careful. We need to know them. We need to find out who they are, where they come from. We need to be careful just jumping all over people for their sin, I guess what I'm getting at is sometimes people are like, well, I speak the truth, no matter what. I tell people like it is, because that's what they need. Jesus didn't do that all the time. Not right away, anyways. So I think we need to be careful how we approach people, too. And so I want to leave you all with two things. just want to encourage you that God is working with compassion in your life. That patience ties in with his compassion. He wants what's best for you. And there may be things in your life that are difficult, and you wonder why God hasn't just taken it away. And again, there's a lot of nuance to this conversation. But I just want to encourage you, God is working to bring the best out of you, to make you the best child of his that you can be. And that's part of why he's given us the church. This is a place where we can find encouragement, comfort, right? A listening ear. But this is also a place where you can be challenged, where somebody can say to you, hey, I love you, but you really should consider how you're acting because I don't know that this is really what's best for you in life, you know? This is a place where you don't always get a pat on the back, but someone is willing to challenge you. And that's hard. We don't always like being challenged.